Hello, everyone. I am so excited to share with you today Laura Portwood-Stacer and her Manuscript Works book webinars. She's somebody who I've been following for a few years now, and I was just telling her that I learned a lot from her Perfect Fit Publisher workshop myself. So if you like today's presentation and you learn a lot from it, you should follow her and follow the other niche webinars she does on basically every part of the publication process. So there's kind of always a moment where I think that she can be helpful to us. Really excited to bring her to a group at UMBC for the first time. I know some of you have used her materials as individuals, so this is the first time we're working together as a community. And oh good, she's got in the chat her future workshops coming up. I think some of you will be interested. So I'm going to turn things over to Laura because she has a lot that she packs in to these webinars. I think Laura will take questions, but
Well, you let me know what the other thing says.
I will, I promise.
hello, everyone. Could you mute yourselves? Thank you. Laura will tell us when we can ask questions at what part of her presentation today. So thank you so much for coming to UMBC virtually. Laura.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. I'm so happy to be here. While people are getting settled, I just want to point you to the web page that I've set up for today. It's in the chat if you scroll up a little bit. It's manuscriptworks.com/UMBC. That's where you can download the slides. The recording will eventually be posted there. And all the handouts that I'll be referencing will be there. So before I get started, I just want to thank you for attending this workshop. I know that there are a lot of resources and information out there about academic publishing, although it's sometimes hard to sift through them all. And I know that your time and your bandwidth are limited, so I don't take it for granted that you have chosen to be here today and spend the next 90 minutes with me. I also want to thank Courtney Hobson, Amy Freud, and the Drescher Center for the Humanities for their kind invitation and for all their labor in making this workshop happen. I am Laura Portwood-Stacer. I run an editing and consulting business called Manuscript Works, and for the last 10 years, I've been helping scholars get their books published. I've worked with many one-on-one as a developmental editor, and I've also helped hundreds of people write proposals through my book proposal accelerator and book proposal shortcut programs. My proposal clients have placed their books with presses like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Duke, MIT, California, Chicago, Oxford, and many other competitive scholarly publishers. I'm also the author of the Book Proposal Book, A Guide for Scholarly Authors, which was published by Princeton UP in 2021. And I have a new book called Make Your Manuscript Work that is coming out this August. As a reminder, today's workshop is being recorded. You can get the recording and all the worksheets and everything that I reference at that webpage that I dropped in the chat. You don't need to download anything or have any handouts open while we're talking here today. They're just kind of there for your future reference later. So I want to step back just for a second to talk about why I do what I do as a consultant and editor, which includes workshops like this one. As you all are aware, so many aspects of academia require knowledge of a hidden curriculum and that knowledge can sometimes be concentrated in certain networks. It's not accessible to everyone. And publishing a book is a challenging process for anyone. But it is true that it can be a bit smoother of a process if you have a famous mentor or elite institutions on your CV, or even if you just have lots of colleagues and friends who have already published books, which is itself a structural issue. And it's not always completely accidental that you might move in circles that have a lot of resources or move in circles that don't have a lot of resources. So my goal is to spread knowledge about publishing to try to level some of those disparities of cultural capital and social capital. And that knowledge is not a magic key to success in book publishing. There is no magic key to success, but I hope to save you months of trial and error and help you feel more confident that you're giving your ideas the best chance of landing effectively with the people who make publication decisions. So, to that end, what we're going to talk about today is sort of demystifying the process of getting a book published, and specifically how to write a book proposal that will stand out in the eyes of scholarly publishers. So, I'm going to do a quick overview of how books get acquired by scholarly presses, and that includes sort of how you approach a publisher and propose your book, and then what happens at the publisher when you do that. Then I'm going to lay out the key components that your book proposal will include. And then I will share some tips and tricks. They're not really tricks, but I call them tricks, to make sure that your proposal stands out from the hundreds or thousands of other proposals that scholarly publishers are receiving every year. And we will have time for questions at the end. I think many of the questions that come up as we go will get answered as we go. So I will save the Q&A for the end, but perhaps Amy can keep an eye on the chat, and if something really urgent comes up, feel free to stop me if I need to clarify anything or anything like that. Okay, so if that's good with everyone, we will jump in. So I think it's really important to have some context for what is going on in the publishing process, because the acquisitions process can be very opaque. Even if you have been through it, even if you have published multiple books, it is not always clear to the author what is going on behind the scenes at the publisher. So I want to lay that out here for everyone, just in the interest of transparency, so we all know what's happening. I do have a flowchart that captures this process visually. If you prefer to sort of learn it that way, that flowchart is downloadable at the website that I shared, but I'm going to lay it out orally here right now. So when you pitch your book, your first reader will be an acquisitions editor and possibly a series editor. So an acquisitions editor is someone who works at a scholarly publisher. They usually specialize in a particular field or set of subject areas, which they call their list. And they are a publishing professional. They are not necessarily trained as a scholar themselves, although some of them do have that background. A series editor is a scholar who collaborates with a publisher to acquire a collection of books united by a cohesive theme. They are often well-connected and highly visible in academic communities, and they rely on their extensive networks to learn about new scholarship and up-and-coming authors. So your first contact at a publisher might be a series editor if it's somebody you're connected to within your field. But the acquisitions editor, the person who works at the publisher, is most likely the one who will bring your book to all the other preliminary readers who will weigh in on it. And that includes peer reviewers, other staff at the press, the editorial board at the press. And so that acquisitions editor is going to be seeing your book through the steps of publication. So when you're ready to formally pitch your book to a publisher, you will submit a proposal, and you will likely include a sample chapter or two with that submission. And you'll send it to either the acquisitions editor or the series editor, and they will assess the fit of your project with their list or series. They may respond immediately, or it could take them a few weeks. On some publishers' websites, they say to allow 8 to 12 weeks for a response. Some of the really big publishers say if you don't receive a response, that's a no. But it could take some time to know where they stand on your project. If that editor sees a good potential fit, they will either ask to see more of the manuscript. They might say, okay, the sample looks great. I'd like to see the whole manuscript. Or they may want to go ahead and have the proposal and sample chapters peer reviewed if you don't have the full manuscript finished yet. And yes, you can submit a book proposal before finishing the book manuscript. And if anyone has questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that more in the Q&A. So if the editor sees a fit, wants to move forward with peer review, then they will ask expert scholars to evaluate your submitted materials and return their thoughts in the form of written reports. I imagine everyone here has some experience with the peer review process, but in book publishing, the timeline varies. It could be a month or 6 weeks to get reviews back on a proposal. It could be several months if the full manuscript is being reviewed. I am hearing from publishers that since COVID, really, so 5 years now, it's been harder to find reviewers, harder to find people who are available to review. So that review process is taking longer because it takes a long time to find people in the first place. And then, they have to be given time to complete the reviews. Unlike peer review for scholarly journals, peer review for books is not anonymous in both directions. So you will not know the identities of your reviewers unless they reveal themselves in their reports, but your reviewers will have access to your name and your CV because in addition to assessing the content of your submission materials, they will also be commenting on your scholarly profile and your perceived authority to write the book that you're proposing. And you can be proactive in shaping the peer review process somewhat. Most editors will welcome your suggestions as to specific reviewers or general categories of reviewer who are most likely to be supportive of your research. You can also let your editor know if there are people who are unlikely to be supportive, because your editor wants to find constructive reviewers. They don't want biased reviewers or people who are too close to you, but they do want people who will give constructive feedback on the project. And if they're not looking for that, then they're not the right editor for your project. So there is a room for a conversation with your editor about who will review this book, although you will not, they will be anonymous to you once the reviews are actually happening. Once the reviews come back, it is the moment for the editor to make a decision. And here are some possible scenarios. The first sort of ideal scenario is that the reviews come back positive. The editor thinks they can move forward. They want to seek approval from their publisher's internal committee and their editorial board to offer you a contract. So if that's where the editor wants to go, they will ask you to write up a response letter to the reviews that lays out your plan for finishing the book and addressing the recommendations of the reviewers. And this letter is not addressed to the reviewers themselves. It is to the editorial board that will be deciding whether to publish your book. And your job in this letter will not be to do everything the reviewers say or to prove that the reviewers were wrong about things, but really just to assure the publisher's editorial board that you're going to write a book that meets the press's standards of publication. So that's one scenario that could happen after peer review. A second scenario is if the editor doesn't think the reports are strong enough to get approval for a contract, but they still believe in your project. So in this case, they might want to find another reviewer to maybe tip the scales with a more positive report, or they might ask you to revise and resubmit. If you've just submitted a sample chapter, they may say, okay, write the whole manuscript and then let's send it back out and see if we get stronger reviews. If you've written the whole manuscript, they may say, okay, revise this manuscript and I will send it out for review again. But at that point, they would not be ready to say, I want to offer you a contract. And then the third scenario would be if the reports come back and they just aren't strong enough to endorse publication and the editor doesn't feel comfortable moving forward. So in this case, they will reject the project, but you can move on to any other presses that you've been considering. It's not the end of the road for your book. So if you find yourself in the first position, which seems like the best position, don't get too caught up. It's a moment for you to make a decision as well as the editor to decide. So you want to ask yourself if you like the direction that the editor and reviewers want you to take the manuscript. Are you confident that you can address the requested revisions in the time that you have available? Have you felt respected and informed throughout the acquisitions process so far? Has anything felt off in the peer reviews or in your interactions with the editor? You should feel that you can trust your acquisitions editor to understand your goals for your book and your career and to advocate for you when necessary, especially when you aren't in the room, because that is really what the editor's role is to advocate for your project. So this should be someone you feel comfortable sharing any concerns with. If you have any hesitation about moving forward with this press, I recommend communicating frankly with your editor. If you can get them on the phone or a Zoom, that can be great for bringing some clarity. Editors may be more willing to say what they honestly think of the reviews and to give you advice about how to navigate responding to the reviews and making your case to the editorial board. So try to have a conversation with your editor if you can at this point. If you are not feeling like this is the right direction for you in your book, you don't have to move forward with that press. You are free to then take the project anywhere else at this point. But if you do want to move forward and the acquisitions editor feels confident in your project and your ability to turn in a satisfactory finished manuscript, they will present the project to an internal staff committee made up of editors, marketers, salespeople, other staff at the press to get it approved. And so they're going to make a presentation that will include what they think it's going to cost to produce your book and how much they think it's going to sell. So basically, this is a sort of a profit and loss presentation. And they're trying to make the case that your book will be a viable financial investment for the press. Or even if they estimate losses, that there's some compelling reason why this book needs to be published by your press. If that presentation goes well, then the editor will take your project to the press's faculty editorial board or their faculty committee. Different presses have different names for this group. And then that is the group that gives sort of the final sign off on, yes, this book is going to be published by this press. At a university press, the editorial board is made up of faculty from across the institution. So most of them won't be experts in your field or your research area, let alone in your specific subject area. So they're not going to be commenting on the content of the book. Their job is to ensure that the review process has been executed properly and that the book sort of generally fits with the vision of the press. So your editor will be providing the editorial board with sample materials from your book, along with the peer reviewers' reports and your response to the reports. And then your editor makes a presentation where they defend your book's intellectual soundness, its contribution, and its fit with the press's publishing program. So your editor's enthusiastic support for the project and their capacity to defend it using the information that you are going to provide in your submission will count for a lot. So understanding that your editor will be making these presentations about your book is really key. And that's why I start with this, because it shows that they really are your advocate within the press. And once they believe in your project, a lot of the labor of making the book happen lies with that editor. So your proposal and your response to the peer reviews are your tools that you use to give that editor all the information they need to do their job, to win them over to the project, and to pitch your book successfully to the people who make the final decision about whether you will be published. So what I have been describing is a gatekeeping process, but you also should know that editors and publishers want to sign new books. Their jobs and their existence depend on it. So if you are working on a manuscript that other scholars are going to want to read, you have something that they need. So I say this so that you'll be hopefully less intimidated by the prospect of reaching out to an editor, so that you will understand that a yes may be just as likely as a no, and that you have power in this relationship. You are bringing something to the table that this editor and this publisher need. If you show up with a polished professional pitch, you have even more power in the process because publishers will see you as an author who is a good bet to produce a polished professional manuscript and in turn a book. So they will be eager to work with you if you show up with a strong proposal. So now that you know about the acquisitions process, I want to look at the nuts and bolts of the proposal itself. So I have a little handout on this. If you want a quick reference, that's also at the webpage that we posted. And it's important to understand the preliminary readers who are going to look at your proposal, and you should know what they're looking for in each component of the proposal. And that's not always obvious to people who don't work in publishing. So that's what I'm going to sort of reveal today, is what these pieces of the proposal are and what publishers are really looking for when they read these parts of your proposal. So if you have a draft of a book proposal that you're working on, feel free to open it up and make some notes on it as I speak. If you don't have a draft yet, feel free to open a blank document, make yourself an outline that you can return to when you're ready to make a draft. And then once we've covered all the elements of your proposal, I'll go through and give you some tips for making each element stand out even more to the publishers that you're targeting. So the first thing that people will see on your proposal is the working title of your book. It won't be final because that may get sort of, your publisher may have thoughts about the title that they want to share later on in the process. But when you submit the proposal, you'll give a speculative title. So what functions does the title serve at this point? It can grab an editor's attention and make them want to know more about this project. And it will signal to an editor what you really think the book is about. So it's going to set the frame that they will then read the rest of the proposal through. So you do want to be thoughtful when coming up with a title for your book, even if you know it could change later. You'll then have a project description or overview. This is sort of the bulk of the proposal, and this will show editors, peer reviewers, and editorial board members what your book is about, what it contributes to your scholarly field, and why the question that you're answering matters. It also serves as sort of a small writing sample, and it will demonstrate whether or not you have a clear handle on what you are doing in this book. A good project description can be done in just a few pages. The template that I use is 6 to 7 paragraphs long. If you have access to the book proposal book, it's the chapter 6 of the book proposal book has that template. I also have it in a free blog post on my website. I'm just going to drop the link in here. So I just dropped the link to my archive, which has lots of resources in it, but one of them is a template for book proposal descriptions. So that'll be a big part of your proposal. You will also discuss your intended audiences for the book, and this is particularly important for marketing and sales staff at the press to understand where and how they should be positioning your book. And it's really the area where you're making a case for the fit between your book and what this press publishes. So presses are looking to exploit their existing marketing channels, the people they already know how to reach. So they're looking for books that are aimed at those people, not books that are aimed at a whole separate group of people they have no experience with. So this is where you can make a strong case for fit. It's also where the case for fit can fall apart. So you do want to be mindful of what has this publisher published before? Who are they trying to speak to, and how are you speaking to that same audience? So for scholarly presses, your book should appeal to scholars, which means advanced graduate students and faculty, people who are doing original research. And you want to think at the level of not just your field, but perhaps your subfield or the division of your field that you situate yourself in, so that your readership feels targeted. You wouldn't just say, I'm writing for historians. That's too broad. Historians of what era or what location. You want to get a little more focused there. Students and course adoption potential is also important to discuss if you see it for your book. So you can list hypothetical course titles or topics where you're discussing your intended audiences. If you are writing for readers outside of academia, that's okay, but you should be realistic and specific about who those readers are. You don't just want to say the general reader, because again, the presses have to be targeted in their marketing, so you need to be targeted in who you're writing for. The next part of your proposal will be the comparable books on the market. So most presses will ask you to list a handful of recent books. So 4 to 6 titles, I would say, is a good number. So you're looking for recent books that establish a current scholarly conversation or multiple conversations if your book is participating in multiple. So it has to be a current conversation, which means that you are looking for books that have been published in the last 3 to 5 years. These are books that would be read alongside your book by the same audiences, by someone doing research on your topic, or students taking a course that both books might be assigned in. And for each title, you'll give a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the book. So that means keep it broad. 1 to 2 sentences is not very much. So you're not getting down into the nitty-gritty of the books. You're just like very broadly describing what this book is about and who it's for. And then you'll take a few more sentences to explain what your book offers to that book's audience, or how your book takes the conversation in a new direction, perhaps bringing in new readers who maybe wouldn't have been interested in the previous book, but will be interested in your book. So what you're doing in the comps, this part of the book proposal is called the comps. What you're doing here is demonstrating that there is a precedent or several precedents for a book like yours. So you never want to say that there aren't any comps or that your book is completely unique, because publishers are risk averse. So that kind of thing doesn't really sit well with them. They are looking for you to connect your book to previous books. So it is good to offer something new with your book, but you can use those comps, the previous books, to show that the path has been worn to some extent, and you are now taking it in an interesting new direction. And if you're writing about sort of an obscure topic or something that hasn't been written about before, you still don't say there are no comps. You want to look for books that maybe aren't on your exact same topic, but books that are similar enough to yours in some way that there would be a common readership. If you can't find any books that have a readership in common with yours, publishers are going to wonder whether there are actually readers out there who want your book. So you got to come up with comps. For your editor, the list of comps also builds an inductive case for what kind of book you think you're writing. So they're going to look at those books that you mention to see, okay, what kind of reach did these books have? What kinds of presses are publishing similar work? And they're going to be looking for that to be a realistic match with their press. So if they don't think they can successfully publish the kind of book you seem to want to write, they may decline the project. So you want to be thoughtful when picking your comps and explaining what you see as being comparable about them. All right, the next larger piece of your proposal is your table of contents and your chapter summaries. So you're going to lay out, the full sequence of chapters in the book, including introductions, conclusions, appendices, everything. And you're going to have a paragraph or two per chapter that will cover the topic of the chapter's argument or its purpose within the book, the evidence that you use in that chapter to support your argument. And you don't have to list each piece of evidence, but you're giving a general idea of the kind of evidence you're drawing on in that chapter. And then you want to explain how the chapter's argument relates to the book's overall thesis and how that chapter relates to other chapters around it in the book. Why does it exist where it does in the table of contents? So you need those summaries for every substantive component. Like I said, if you're going to have a preface, if you're going to have an intro, an epilogue, whatever you're going to throw in there, you have to explain why it's there and what it's doing in the book. And this part of the proposal is especially important for peer reviewers because it's going to help them understand how your book is going to come together on the page. It's where they will look to see if you can pull off what you said you were going to do in the overview about the book. And so this is where you're avoiding the kind of proposal that's all ideas and no substance, because you'll be showing what readers will actually encounter across the pages of the book. And this is also where you're proving that your topic and your argument can sustain a full book-length treatment, because sometimes editors might say, well, couldn't this just be an article? Maybe this makes more sense as a magazine piece and not as a book that we're going to publish. But if you show that, well, no, this has to be 6 chapters and each chapter is very important to the purpose of this book, then you're making the case that it needs to be a book. The next things you'll include are your manuscript specifications or specs. And this will be your estimated total word count. And that includes everything. So your notes, your bibliography, your acknowledgements, everything except the index. And then you'll also let them know about the number and type of images you plan to include in the book. So this will be any photographs, tables, maps that you plan to have, and you'll want to specify whether those are going to be black and white or color, anything that goes into the production of the book. So this part of the proposal helps your editor and the production staff understand how much labor and cost is going to be required to make your book. And the marketers and sales staff at the press will have a sense of whether the kind of book you're proposing tends to sell well and get picked up by retailers and librarians and all that. They might know that, okay, really, really long books, we have a hard time selling those, or really, really short books, our readers expect something more substantial. So that's why they need to know what the length of the book is and what kinds of images you plan to include. Then you'll also let them know the status of the manuscript. So that means you'll say how much is presently complete and ready for peer review today, the day you are sending the proposal. And if the full manuscript isn't fully complete yet, you'll give an estimated month and year when the full manuscript would be ready for peer review. So this helps the editor plan the peer review process. It helps them determine if an advance contract or a full contract might be appropriate. It helps the whole team at the publisher plan for the year and the season when your book would likely be ready for release. These these dates are not set in stone, but you're just giving a sense of how things will move forward and when they could move forward with the publisher. Then you'll also include some information about yourself as the author. Some presses will ask for a CV. They may ask for an author CV, which is sort of a truncated version of your full CV that only focuses on the things that are relevant to this particular book project. But many publishers will also ask for a short narrative biography in your proposal itself. And that will be used by those who are assessing your qualifications to write and market the book. So it will be looked at by the editor and peer reviewers and other staff at the press. It may also be used by publicity staff to understand where your name is likely to be recognized for the purpose of promoting your book. They'll want to know what kinds of networks you're involved in, where you could publicize your book once it's released. So those are things to include in your proposal. Some presses will ask for a writing sample. That's pretty much the norm with your proposal. And that is there for the editor and peer reviewers to get a sense of how you write, the voice you're bringing to your topic. Peer reviewers may use the sample to actually evaluate it for its strength of argument, its scholarly contribution, how compelling the evidence is, etc. So this is why actual chapters from the book are most helpful as writing samples, especially for first-time authors. Sometimes publishers are willing to look at something that's not directly from the book, like an article or something else you've published. But for first-time authors, they often do want to see an actual chapter from the book. And if you have questions about kind of which chapters, happy to talk about that in Q&A too. Some presses will ask for additional pieces to the proposal. Some will ask for a statement about previously published material. Some will ask you to talk about whether this project has grown out of a dissertation. And in that case, you'd want to explain how it has changed, how you've revised it and reframed it since the dissertation. Some presses will ask for a list of suggested reviewers in the proposal itself. So you want to check your target press's guidelines and try to include anything that they ask for. So I just threw a lot out at you. So I want to take just like a little few minutes for processing time. So I have some questions for you to just kind of contemplate while we do that. So we'll break until, for about 4 minutes, maybe until 10 after. So I'm going to post some questions on the screen. Just pick one or two that jump out at you and just jot some notes about it, whatever comes into your head. I have a worksheet on the webpage for today that has all the questions plus a few more bonus questions. So you can return to that later if you like this exercise. But for now, just let's start with these questions. What first made you interested in writing about this topic? What's the most interesting story from your research, and why is it the most interesting? Why do you, as the expert on this, think it's interesting? Why are you the right person to write this book? So this might be something about your specific background or about the specific research that you conducted as the writer of the book. What's the main thing readers should understand by the end of this book? What if there was just one takeaway you hope that they would be able to tell other people about when they put this book down? What would it be? So I'm just going to leave these questions up. I'm going to pause for a couple more minutes now, and then we'll come back. Okay, so hopefully you had a couple minutes to reflect. And of course, you can come back to these later. These questions reflect the kinds of things that editors will want to know about a new book. They might even ask you a question like this directly in conversation, if you are, chatting with them before submitting your proposal. And these are also things you can use as hooks in your project description, in your query emails to editors. So, congrats, you have some raw material now that you can work with when you go write up your proposal and reach out to editors. So in the last little bit of my talk here, I want to leave you with 10 ways to make your book proposal stand out when you submit it to a publisher. So you already know what the different required elements are. Here's where we're going to get into the lesser known tricks to make your proposal stand out from the crowd. They are not actually tricks. They are just things that people don't always think of or realize that they should be doing when they're writing their proposal. So I'm going to set them up as sort of potential missed opportunities that you're not going to miss because you're going to know to do them in your proposal. So if you do incorporate these things into your proposal, it will give a very polished impression to any press that you are planning to submit to. So I'm going to start with some of the harder ones. They'll get easier as we go. So stick with me on these. So the first one is to clearly state your book's main thesis in your project description. And this might seem obvious, but when I see proposal drafts, people are coming to me with their first draft of a proposal, they often describe the book's subject matter in detail, but they don't stake a clear claim about that subject matter. So it's really important that the people reading your proposal come away with a clear idea of not just what the topic of the book is, but what is this author's specific take on the topic. A topic alone may not be enough to sell a book to a publisher unless it's just a super marketable topic with a lot of demand. But a clearly stated argument or a thesis, that's how you communicate what you're bringing to the topic at hand. And it's also key for peer reviewers who may say, well, this seems like a good subject for a book, but I don't know what this author wants to say about it or why they should be the one to write it. So bringing an original argument gives you ownership of the book's concept because it's really hard to own a topic. Anybody else could come say, I want to write about that same thing, but your take on the topic is what makes you the person to write the book in the eyes of the publisher. But I said I was going to start with the harder ones. This is probably the single hardest thing to figure out when you're writing a book. Most people can say pretty early on what they are writing about, but it may take you years or multiple drafts of the manuscript to be able to summarize the core argument you want to make. For the right topic, an editor might be willing to take a risk that an author will eventually figure out what they want to say, but your proposal will feel much stronger if the argument is clear from the get-go. So, one way that this shows up is there's no clearly stated argument. Another way that a lack of clarity can happen is if you're trying to pack too many arguments into one book. So remember that you don't have to say everything that could be said about your topic to write a valuable book. You don't have to have every opinion on every facet of it. It should be clear what the main argument is. There can be other subordinate arguments, but it should also be clear how they are subordinated. And I say this because when you've been working on something for years and years, you can feel like you have to have a lot to show for that work. So you just want to be like, this is a really important book. There's a lot to it. But editors and readers really aren't looking for a brain dump of everything you know about your topic. That can make the book feel like it's going in a bunch of different directions. So you do just want to zero in on that one main thing you are trying to get across with this book. And I don't know how many here are working from a dissertation, but when a project description lacks a clear argument or it has a lot of arguments that aren't really organized, that can be a red flag to an editor that this author hasn't fully digested their findings. And so it can be a little clue like, oh, this is a dissertation that hasn't quite become a book yet. So when publishers say, oh, we don't publish PhD-based monographs, they reject proposals based on dissertations, this is really what they're worried about. it's not that they won't publish something based on a dissertation, but they need it to look like a book with a clear argument. All right, the other thing to do in your project description is to spell out the book's contributions and what readers will take away from it. So a lot of authors, we're so used to writing academic work that we are not used to the proposal format, which is more of a meta format where we're talking about the work. We're not actually presenting the work and the substance of the work for the most part. So you have to sort of get away from that and realize that the content of this book does not speak for itself. It is your job to speak for it in the proposal. So you don't want to leave it up to the reader to figure out why it's important. You tell them why it's important. You're the expert who understands where this knowledge fits into the field and what contribution it's making. I think sometimes people are afraid of talking about their books in these ways because they think it seems inelegant or awkward, but that is what the proposal is there to do. That is what publishers are looking for. They need you to explain to them what this book is and why it's going to be valuable. And many of the people involved in evaluating the book and whether it's going to get published are never going to read the whole book. They will read the proposal. They might read some excerpts of it. So you have to lay it out there. Don't be afraid to be too obvious, because what is obvious to you may not be obvious to someone who hasn't spent years immersed in your topic and your context. Come out and say what people will find compelling about the book and what you're adding to the scholarly conversation. And remember that many of the people reading this proposal won't be scholars. And if they are scholars, they may not be experts in your field. So you do have to hold their hand a bit through why this is important. Now, sometimes the problem for proposal writers is that they don't actually know what's valuable about the project in the eyes of others. They are compelled by it, but have a hard time selling it. So my suggested fix for this is get out there and talk to people about the work. Not just your dissertation committee or your close friends who have sort of been on this journey with you, but talk to new people and then look at what they connect with about it. Teaching the material to students, getting articles or little pieces of it peer reviewed and reading those peer review reports, presenting pieces at conferences and seeing what people respond to or what they want to talk to you about afterward. That's all a form of feedback that you can use and then incorporate right into the proposal. So yeah, and again, I'm going to hit this point again. You're writing for non-experts for the most part with the proposal. Yes, there will be a couple of expert peer reviewers, but most of the people who read this document are not experts. So you don't want to get bogged down in really specific theory debates and, field-specific terminology when you're talking about why this book is important or how it pushes the conversation forward. If your contribution is intervening in a debate that only people in your subfield are even aware is a debate, that could make your book seem a bit narrow, and that could turn off some of the publishers you might be interested in working with. All right, we're going to go back up to the title. So many people write their titles and are trying to perfectly capture what the book is about, which is good. But really what the title is a marketing tool that brings in people who have no idea who you are or what this book is. So it's not so much about perfectly capturing the book. It's about telling a reader this book is for you. So your title is your chance to bring them in. So you want to use keywords that will connect with the readers you want to reach, things that they connect with and say okay, that's what I write about too, or that's what I'm interested in. So this book is probably for me. I always suggest putting verbs between the keywords to hint at the relationships you're going to want readers to understand. A lot of academic titles just have sort of a list of nouns, which are topics that are in the book. That's okay. But you can get your take, that original take that you bring to the topics across if you put some verbs in there. You want to avoid cryptic titles or really culturally specific references that could fail to connect with readers, unless it will really directly interpolate the readers you want to reach. So it's okay to use references if it says this book is for you and it's capturing the right people. But if it's excluding people who might come into the book, then you might want to rethink it. All right, so now I'm moving into the audience section of your proposal. And if you have a draft open or an outline open right now, again, feel free to put these little tips in there in your comments or little placeholders so you remember to cover these things. So your job in the audience section is to show your press a clear path to getting the book in front of readers who will definitely need this book. And one thing I see authors do a lot is naming as many audiences as they can think of who might connect with their book. But that is a mistake because really the idea of getting a clear path to audiences is about being focused in which audiences this publisher should be focusing on. And publishers don't have infinite marketing resources. They will not go take your book to 10 different conferences. They are going to try to think of the one or two that are going to be most relevant. So a well-defined audience in one specific scholarly subfield is not a bad thing. That's a good thing to have in your proposal. Don't overstate how far you want your readership to reach because you think that's what a press wants to hear. It is not necessary to name 10 audiences. One is great. Two or three that feel like a really solid fit for your book. That's good. If you do see multiple audiences for your book, it's still helpful to prioritize them in your proposal. So you want to identify who will see the book as indispensable. Then you can say, okay, these other audiences will also be interested. It's, maybe less urgent that we reach those people. And you want to do your homework to make sure that the audiences you are prioritizing are also a priority for the press that you are sending your proposal to. So I said this before, but I'll say it again because it's really important. The fit between your book's intended audience and the audiences the press already knows how to reach is probably the biggest deciding factor that an editor is going to consider when deciding whether to pursue a book project or not. So this is where you want to make that case very strongly. A press may shy away from a book if the author seems to have an overly ambitious vision for it, if that press is not equipped to realize the vision. So, if you're putting 10 different audiences in your proposal, like, does your press have an interest in those 10 audiences? Do they have already previous books for those 10 different audiences? Probably not. So they're going to see that, okay, we can't actually help the author write this book that they want to write. And so they may decline it. If you're trying to say that you want to write a trade book or a crossover book, a book for a broad general audience, look at your press's track record of doing that. Are they equipped to help you do that? Or are they really writing for very specific groups of scholars? So you want your audiences in your proposal to align with the audiences that this press has established. If your book is interdisciplinary, you want to frame your audiences carefully. You want to make sure that they are all audiences that your press is poised to reach. Some presses, are known for publishing interdisciplinary books. Places like Duke, Minnesota, California. So there you have a little more wiggle room. If you're trying to publish with a more traditional press that has very clear disciplinary strengths, then you may want to strategically prioritize one of your audiences in your proposal. And I have a free workshop coming up in April. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my calendar on April 2nd about how to pitch an interdisciplinary book. So I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. Because I'm not going to talk too much about that today, but I know it's a concern for people. So if you are an interdisciplinary scholar, come to this free workshop and we'll really dig into how to write your proposal for a book that is interdisciplinary. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the comps section of your proposal. And here is where people often really miss the point of this section of the proposal. So people will talk about other books without explaining what is special about their book. So many people treat the comps section of the book proposal like a lit review or like a quals defense, where they think their job is to demonstrate how well they understand the previous scholarship, but that is not the point. Honestly, you don't even need to have read the books that are on your comps list. You will not be quizzed about them at any point. You are using these books as a point of reference just to help people better understand your book and what it offers. So you don't want to get into nuances of theory and analysis with the other books. Give the briefest of overview statements about those books and who they were written for, and then quickly pivot to what makes your book distinctive in comparison. So what would readers be looking for after reading those other books that your book will step in and offer? And when you explain that, that helps your publisher see like what's the marketing hook for this book. They're going to be trying to sell your book to people who have already bought that other book, whether those are readers or librarians or bookstores that might stock the book. So you can tell them, well, here's what you tell those people when they need to know, why do I buy this new book when I've already seen those other books? And to go the extra mile, identify which readers will appreciate the distinctions that you're offering. Connect the dots for the marketing people, because that's really what the comps are about. It's about the readers and the people who will buy books that your book could be sold to. And I'm going to stress this one more time because I can't stress it enough. Don't say that there are no comps for your book. It doesn't win you points with editors. It makes their job harder, in fact, because then they have to figure out on their own whether there's a market for your book or a scholarly conversation that your book is fitting into. And then they have to sell their colleagues on it. So often they come up with comps if you don't provide any. So this is your chance to really shape the narrative about your book and why it matters. Here's an easy one on your comps list. List at least one comp from your target press. That will show that you have done your homework on what that press offers, that you've thought about why your book would fit there. And it also gives a really easy point of reference for the people who work at the press. They're already aware of that book. They know everything about it. They know how to market that book. So when you say, oh, my book is like this book, they can immediately say like, okay, we get it. We understand this book. All right, now I'm moving into the chapter summaries. I have a couple of tips here. These are probably the ones that people most often miss. So they're good ones for you to scoop up, some easy points for you to score. So when you are laying out your chapters in the book, if you can explain what each chapter argues and how that sub-argument supports the book's main thesis, or how it stretches the thesis or complicates it or takes it in a new direction, you're creating a very strong picture of a book that has been thoughtfully constructed. It's leaving no doubt in your readers' minds that each chapter has a purpose and a value for the people who will buy this book and ultimately use it. So doing this one simple thing, making sure there's an argument in each chapter and explaining how it connects to the overall thesis of the book, that makes your book feel really well conceived, really reader friendly. And if you actually write your book that way, it will lead to stronger engagement with your book and your argument. It will make it more likely to be taught and cited and circulated. That's what your publisher wants for your book, and that's probably what you want too. The other thing you can do in your chapter summaries is explain how each chapter relates to the ones around it. So at the beginning of each summary, use a little bit of setting up language to explain why we're moving from the previous chapter to this one. Is it a new setting? Is it a different topic? How did you decide to transition from this one to this one? Just spell that out, reveal it in the chapter summary. If you're talking about the first chapter, explain why you decided to start there. That's going to be really effective at showing through your proposal that your book has a strong arc, has a through line. It's going to pull readers through it. And it shows that you're a thoughtful writer, which it just creates an impression of you as a writer that makes a good impression on publishers. And they're going to assume you're going to be just as thoughtful when you write the full book. Moving into the specs for your book, don't go wild with your word count and your images. Look at what's normal at the press that you are targeting to get a sense of what might be safe to propose. So remember that your editor is going to make an internal presentation at the press where they argue that your book is a good investment. And if the book you're proposing is going to be too costly to produce, that's a tougher argument to make for the editor. Then you have to have other things that make up for it and make your book just so outstanding. So you can get yourself a few points by just being safe with your length and your number of images. If you're proposing a lavishly illustrated coffee table book, make sure the press you are pitching has done that in the past. If you are a first-time author writing a 400-page monograph, look and see whether your press has published those kinds of books before. Often those really long ones are by people much later in their career who can sell a book based on their name alone. So there may be less flexibility if you're a first-time author on what you can get away with in your specs. So just the safest way forward is to put something that's very average for that press. If then you want to have a conversation with your editor about different things you might see for the book, do that later. Don't give them a reason to reject the book right out of hand in the proposal. Okay, last one. Think about your author bio, not just in terms of your qualifications, but in terms of your platform. And when I'm talking about platform, basically an author platform is all the stuff you've done that prepares you to be a partner in selling the book. So in your author bio, you will talk about the things that give you credibility in the eyes of readers, like your PhD training, any faculty posts you've held, topics of courses that you've taught. But you also want to think about promotion opportunities that you already have access to. So any networks that you're active in, anytime someone has come to you when they need expertise on your topic. Those are all really helpful things for publishers to understand about you. If you've done anything extra to get your research out there, publishers love hearing about it. So, I mean, conference presentations, that's great in itself. That's pretty standard for a lot of academic writers. But if you've done podcasts, if you've written op-eds, any media interviews, if you've organized a conference about your topic or a special issue of a journal related to your topic or an edited volume, if you're involved with community groups outside of academia who might be interested in this book, all of that is stuff that is worth showing off to your publisher. Don't assume they'll see it in the CV. Don't assume they'll assume it. This is your chance to really make sure they know how much of a partner you're going to be in promoting this book. And I always say that facts are not bragging. Your press wants to know if you are someone who can help sell this book. So don't be shy about it. They won't know unless you tell them. So your proposal is your chance to tell them. So, okay, now you know how to put your proposal together. You know some pitfalls to avoid. You know some little tweaks you can make that will really make it stand out for editors and reviewers. Not only will these things help you write a great proposal, but they will probably help you write a better book too. And hopefully most of these tips feel pretty straightforward now that you know about them and you know to implement them. And I know that your proposal will stand out if you do these things because I've worked with hundreds of authors on early drafts of their proposals. So I have seen over and over again the things people tend to miss and that are probably getting missed by people who are not talking to me about their proposals. If you do these things, you'll be in really good shape. I've heard back from many of the authors that I've worked with who have been complimented by their editors on their proposals. So I know that the tips work and you can definitely do it. So we'll get into Q&A in just a sec, but I want to leave you with where you can learn more because we really had a pretty short amount of time today to dig into this. There's more about the proposal and how to write it in the book proposal book, and also in my newsletter, I share tips. That's free. You can sign up for it at newsletter.manuscriptworks.com. I'm going to put a link in the chat that you can click on. That comes out every week, and I try to do a lot of like nuts and bolts tips like the ones I shared today. I also have a web archive where I've answered a lot of the most common author questions that I've received. So I dropped that in the chat, a couple links up. And I also have a few online programs. If you're looking for more structured support to write and pitch your book proposal, my 6-week book proposal accelerator starts in May. And we go into even more depth on each little piece of the proposal, and you have an opportunity to get direct feedback on the elements of your proposal as you work on them. And then this year I am running a bunch of free workshops, which I think Amy mentioned. They're on topics like surviving peer review, clarifying your goals for your book, how to work with a developmental editor. So some of them are already done and recorded. You can access the recordings, and some of them are coming up. I always announce them in my newsletter. So if you're on the newsletter, you'll see them. But you can also go to courses.manuscriptworks.com. I'll throw that in there. that's where you'll see a lot of those free public workshops and also some of my paid programs, if those are interesting to you. So, okay, let's get to your questions. No question is too small or weird, I promise. I have heard all of them. If you're wondering about something, probably other people are wondering about it too. If you have a specific situation with a project or an editor or a publisher that you want some perspective on, I'm happy to talk about that. I think it's always instructive to hear what different people's experiences are. Um, and if you have questions about my programs, I'm happy to talk about those as well. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Hopefully people have gotten all the links that they need. Let's see. So I can see you all. Great. Okay, so Amy, I don't know if you have a way you want to handle the Q&A, if you want to call in people or have people write in the chat or
I'm happy to call in people. So, raise your hands or just put something in the chat and I'll call on you. I see right now Steve Dashel has his hand up.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Laura, for the presentation. I have a really quick question because I'm still at the stage of collecting data for my book because I just got like a little bit of funding to actually do the interviews that will build my book. But I've done some writing already for edited collections and the chapters there. And I've been told that the guidance I've been given for writing a chapter for an edited collection is not the guidance you want for writing your whole book, as in terms of length. So what should you shoot for as far as like a chapter size that's not going to terrify a publisher because it's too big or make them run away because it's too small?
yeah, so I mean, I do think there's a lot of flexibility on this. I don't think publishers are so focused in on the length of your chapters as much as the overall structure of the book and whether it seems to make sense. So I have seen publishers, I've seen people propose like a book with 3 body chapters that are pretty long, like, I don't know, 20,000 words or something. I have seen publishers say, 3 body chapters sounds like a dissertation to me, or sounds like 3 articles or something. So that they might shy away from, but I don't think it's the actual length of those chapters that's scaring them. It's the way the book has been conceived as a whole. So hopefully that's helpful. I mean, just like ballpark lengths, I would say shoot for like anywhere between 8,000 to 12,000 words. But I don't know your field. I would say, if you're a historian or a literary scholar, often their chapters skew longer because there's more, like primary source documentation and things like that. If you said you're doing interviews, so, if you're going to have a lot of like direct quotes from interviewees, that could lengthen it a bit. So, I've also seen books work where the chapters had 15,000 words. So it's really the total word count that is more concerning to the publisher and the way you're fitting the chapters together. Does that help, or is there any like anything you want to follow up with?
No, that does help. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Other questions? I'm scanning to make sure I'm not missing. Lots now. I'm not sure who went first, but Julie Oakes is being very open in her gestures, so I'm going to go with her.
Very demonstrative. So thank you very much. This was really helpful and interesting. As someone who is an older scholar who does not have a book already, what is your suggestion as to how I find the best publisher that suits what I do? I don't really know that.
Yeah. Okay. So I think Amy mentioned this at the beginning. I have a 5-day challenge coming up at the end of April, which is all about finding the right publisher for you. So if you go to my courses.manuscriptworks.com, you should see it there. There's 2 versions. There's one you could start today. That's $35. But if you have a month to wait, just wait for the end of April, and that's going to be the free one. And that'll be live. So like I'll be emailing you every day, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end, if you have specific questions about your project and finding a publisher for it. But I would say your quickest, my quickest answer is try to find comps, try to find books that are similar to the one you're trying to write. Those are your best shot publishers, or whoever published those books.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I will give a plug, Julie. That was super helpful for me to do Laura's course, and it's a lot of it's async work. So so she prepares you, and then you go do it, and you do the homework, and it's super helpful. You know, Carol.
Over the years that I have been publishing, the total word count seems to have fallen, and I just wondered, is there a sort of industry total word count that they're looking for a
Yeah, great
book?
question. Yeah. It really depends on your field. What field are you in?
I am in gender, women, and sexuality studies, so I publish on reproductive health issues.
Okay. So I was going to say, books in the humanities tend to be longer. Books in the social sciences tend to be shorter. I would say the typical range, just in general, is like 70,000 to 100,000 words. That's really what publishers are looking for. But in the social sciences, they may really want it under 90,000.
Mhm.
I have worked with historians who their publisher has said a history under 100,000 feels thin to readers. So it's got to be 100,000 or 110 or 120,000. But I would say the general rule of thumb is that publishers are friendly to shorter books because they're just cheaper to
Cheaper.
produce. You can put a lower price on them. You can sell more copies of it because more people can afford it. So yeah, if you do want to write like a little snappy 60,000 word book, I don't think many publishers would have a problem with that.
No, I write long. That's my
Okay.
problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Eric Stoken.
Thank you. This has really been wonderful and so much insight into the process. And I apologize, I had to step away for a moment, so if you covered this, my apologies. But for first-time authors, how much of the overall manuscript would you say should be completed? I don't know if this varies by field. I'm coming from the social sciences, a little bit more of a quantitative bent and kind of political science, but really focused on urban affairs.
Yeah, great question. I think this mostly comes down to the press. Um, it's a little bit about first time versus second time. Like I think a second time author can nearly always get an advance contract, meaning a contract before the book is completed. But a first time author, it tends to depend on the press. The larger presses tend to be more willing to do an advance contract because they can absorb the risk of it. Whereas a smaller press will want to know, like, yeah, this book is done, it's written, the author is going to turn it in, the peer reviewers think it's good in its complete form. So they might want to do that first before they put a book under contract. So if you're in political science, I get the sense that the major presses in that field would be like Cambridge, Princeton,
Yeah.
Cornell. Is that right?
Yeah. Cambridge, Oxford. Yeah, absolutely. Cornell.
Yeah. So I would say Cambridge, Oxford, and Princeton all do advanced contracts. Cornell, I'm not sure about. It would depend on probably the project and how, again, like how much risk they're willing to take for it. Um, and for many people, the process of writing the book is where you figure out what you want to say in it. So it may be hard to even write a proposal if you haven't written the full manuscript, at least sketched it. So it also really comes down to the author and like what you want. And do you need an advance contract for a compelling reason? Sometimes you don't. Like sometimes it really doesn't count for anything at your institution. So you might as well wait until you've got the book written. Did that answer what you were?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Laura, can I ask a follow-up question to
Yeah.
that? 'Cause I think a lot of untenured professors think that advanced contract is the way to go to show that they have a press interested in them. And it seems to have moved that way a lot in the field. Are there I guess I have two questions. Are there any instances of advanced contracts, frankly, not leading to ultimately a contract? And does it really cut time off in getting your manuscript to publication?
Great questions. Okay, so I'll say, just for clarification, when you sign a contract before you've turned in the full manuscript, that's the contract. There will not be another, like a real contract that comes later. Like that is your contract with the press. They have agreed to publish the book contingent upon peer review of the full manuscript going well and contingent upon the editorial board deciding they want to publish it. So it's not a done deal when you've got that advance contract, but it is a legal commitment. But the cases where I have seen those fall through and not lead to the book actually getting published usually don't really have to do with, the peer reviewers not signing off on the final manuscript. It usually has to do with the author misses the deadline, like misses the submission of the full manuscript. Many presses are flexible on that, but I have seen it happen where they've used that as like their reason to be like, well, we're not going to move forward with this book. And I have also seen authors, take 4 years longer than they said they would. And then the press is like, well, we're just not interested in this anymore. It was really interesting to us 5 years ago. Other times when it may fall through is if your editor, who is your advocate at the press, who is the person who decided this project was great and like sort of got everyone else on board, if that editor leaves the press, there may be less of a sense of commitment to you and your project at the press. I have seen many authors make it through that, have their editors leave and still get their book published, and it's fine, but they do kind of feel lost a bit, a little bit abandoned, a little less support from the press at that point. So, and turnover is really real in scholarly publishing because just like the academy, it's like they don't get paid very much and they're expected to do more with less all the time, and it's a stressful job. So that is one sort of point maybe against an advance contract is like, are you certain that editor is still going to be there when you finish your manuscript? And it's still going to be your partner? It may be better to just like make the agreement once you're ready to go with the full manuscript. As far as saving time, it doesn't save time. It actually increases the number of steps in the process. It increases the number of resources the press has to invest because now they have to compensate, not a lot, but they pay a little bit to their peer reviewers. So they're having to pay them twice now because they're having them peer review the sample chapters and the full manuscript. There's just the lag of finding the reviewers, getting their feedback back. So it actually introduces like several more months into the process. Oftentimes authors can absorb that because they're still writing the book anyway. So like while it's going through that, preliminary stuff with the advance contract, they're still just plugging away at it. But if you show up to the press at the moment when you have a full contract, a full manuscript ready, the process will likely be quicker because you will hopefully only have to go through peer review once. You'll get those comments back. You'll incorporate them. They won't have to go back out to the peer reviewers. The editor will sort of oversee your revisions, and then you'll be done and you'll move into production. The only way that could not be true is if, you write the full manuscript, but you had kind of no direction on it, and you took it in a direction that just like didn't really work for that press, I guess. Whereas if you had submitted a proposal and sample chapters, you'd get a little bit of feedback up front that could make the rest of the writing process smoother for you because you would kind of have that feedback. Some people really benefit from having the encouragement up front, having some kind of endorsement from the press that, yes, this is a worthwhile project, keep going on it. That mental boost can be priceless. So it really depends on your personality too, as to what's going to be most helpful, I think. And I will say, as far as like using the advanced contract as a credential or something that like is good for your institution, that really depends on the institution. Some institutions value that. Some don't think it's worth the paper it's printed on because it's not a book. The book is not done. It hasn't been accepted. It's not published. So you have to talk to mentors at your institution in theory, not in theory. Ideally, get it in writing that an advanced contract will count for something. Otherwise, you don't know how they're going to spin it.
That is super helpful. Thank you. I see Bambi's been very patient, and then I know Constantine has another question to follow up.
Hi there, thank you. That was all really helpful. I'm here sort of for two reasons. One is because I'm thinking about my next book and kind of wondering if things have changed since I wrote my proposal a million years ago. And for the first one, but then also to help guide other scholars, junior scholars coming up. So I have some questions, and some of them you've answered, so I'm like looking through them. Okay, can people send proposals to multiple presses? And if so, how do they disclose that? What kind of obligations are they under? Is that better and I think you don't do that with a full manuscript, but if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be helpful. You said you might say something about a recommended sample chapter. I think that would be super helpful. And then just a small question, that word count, it's so hard. Like my first book, I literally counted like pages and then averaged and then tried to figure out how many words a book was. But does it count the beginnings and the end in full? So like your index and all the front and back materials, and then what would you recommend people estimate for that in terms of, yeah. So word count, multiple presses, and how to choose a sample chapter.
Yeah, great. Okay, so for the word count, yes, it includes everything except the index. Everything else that you are putting on the page and sending to the press is included in the word count. So, when you're estimating the word count of your own book, you could just use, your word processor will have like a tool. If you're trying to figure out, okay, what is typical at the press I'm aiming for, like how long are their books, then yeah, I would do what you did, which is like do some math and like count the words on the page. I mean, I've seen many sources say that, 250 words per page is the sort of guideline. That is just not true in scholarly publishing. They pack a lot more words onto the page. It can be 350, 400, and it varies by book. So I do think your best bet is probably to like count. And here's how I would do it. I would count the number of words on 3 lines, then figure out how many lines are on the page, do some math to figure out how many words are on the page, then multiply by the number of pages. Yeah. But I will say that sort of 70 to 100,000 word range is pretty safe. Like that's pretty typical across the board. So if you're not totally sure where yours is going to end up, I would just say something. I would just say 85,000 words, or you could say it'll be between 80 and 90,000 words. It's okay to give a range like that. And then this is like not the most satisfactory advice, but I would say just like set yourself a target and then work backward from it. Make sure the final book ends up there. If you ended up writing way over, then you'll have to do some developmental editing and figure out what to cut. If you're under, you'll have to figure out what to add. But just, set a rough target. Okay, and then okay, now we're working back. Multiple publishers. Yes. Okay, so I talked about this a lot in a workshop that I did in January. So if you have like first-time authors or people who aren't sure about this, I would point them to that workshop. It's called Land a Scholarly Book Contract. It's in my courses page. They can register for it anytime and view the recording of it. But yes, unlike in journal publishing, you can send a book proposal to multiple publishers at the same time. I recommend keeping the number manageable, under 5, 2 to 3, maybe. Because it gets really hairy when you start to get interest from multiple publishers, and now you're like balancing them all and like, oh, was I transparent with everyone? Does everyone know what's going on here? Someone wants to review it. Some publishers will do simultaneous review, meaning they'll allow you to have your proposal being reviewed at the same time by other presses, but some won't. Some require exclusive review. So then that gets tricky of, well, this one wants exclusive, but that one doesn't. But the exclusive one's my first choice. And so I really encourage people to rank their target publishers and then only submit simultaneously to the ones they equally like, where they would be equally happy to accept an offer from. I don't encourage having a safety built in there, because what I've seen happen over and over is the safety, because they know they're a safety type press, gets very aggressive, and then the author feels pressured to like go with that press, and it's not the right move for their career. Or they just feel bad like telling that person no who's been really enthusiastic. So again, that's a personality thing too. Like multiple submission is not for everybody. If that's going to stress you out, just pick your favorite, try with them first, see what happens. And as far as like when do you disclose, there's a couple ways you can do it. I mean, the assumption at this point in time is that that's all fair game. You can be sending the proposal to multiple presses. So you don't necessarily have to say that up front. It can be helpful to say that up front so that the press knows they are not the only one in the mix. If they like this project, they are going to have to jump on it and move with the author. That can go the other way if they're like lukewarm on the project and they're like, well, okay, they're looking at other people. We don't really need to be so aggressive with this. So you can say it up front, or you can wait until they express interest. Once they get to the point of wanting to send it out for review, then that's when they really need to know, are other presses in the mix? So then you would say, oh, just to let you know, I have received interest from another publisher. I have not sent it out for review with them yet, or I have already sent it out for review with them. Are you okay with simultaneous review? Like that's when you need to get the okay. It should not come as a surprise later in the process to an editor or publisher that you have been talking to other presses. And they should expect and support authors in talking to other presses. If you have a press that is acting offended that they are not the only press you would want to publish with, like that's not a supportive press. That is not, they don't have the author's best interest in mind. But most of the editors I talk to are fully supportive of that. And you say up front, I'm still looking for the best home for this project. You know, it's not about trying to get more money or like trying to game the system. It's really, I'm trying to find the right partner. And so I have to do research to find that. You know, I have to be talking to multiple people, and most presses will understand that. Okay, and then sample chapters. So this question comes up a lot, like which chapters should you send as the sample? Some presses will have preferences about that. They will say in their proposal guidelines, please send, you know, an introduction chapter and a body chapter. Or sample chapter including the introduction, sample chapters including the introduction. I think, you know, if you have a choice in the matter, you want to send the best chapter you have, just like whatever represents your book the best. So like the one that's the best written, the most finalized. So that could mean something you've already published as a peer-reviewed article that you're adapting into a chapter because you know it's made it through peer review already, like you know it's pretty solid. So that's one way to go. The downside of that is you've already gotten feedback on that. So if you want to use the proposal process to get feedback, then you might want to submit something that you haven't gotten experts to look at yet to get that chance at feedback. But then, you know, there's a little more of a risk there because what if they don't like it? So there's that. I would say pick a chapter that is the most representative of what you are trying to do in the book. So if you've got a chapter in there that's just like background information or like the theoretical framework, I personally don't encourage chapters like that because I think every chapter should push the book forward and have an argument to make. But a lot of people do structure their books like that. So I would not use that chapter as your sample chapter because it doesn't show what you're really going to be doing in the book if you have a bunch of empirical chapters or, you know, analysis chapters. So pick one that's going to best speak for the book as a whole and that the feedback you get on it is going to be constructive. And then I would say, as far as sending an introduction, some editors really want to see an introduction. I personally, the way I teach people to write proposals, I think that the introduction becomes redundant with the proposal if you're writing a good proposal. So if you're following my template for proposals, if you use the book proposal book, I would say you don't need an introduction chapter also, unless the editor specifically asks for it. I would say send 2 body chapters if you can. Does that hit everything? Okay, great.
Easy. We have 1 minute left. Laura, would you entertain the last question?
Absolutely. I can stay on if there's more.
Oh, that's really lovely. Thank you. Constantine, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. And I had a brief comment and a question. The comment, and if this was in your presentation, I missed it, please excuse me, but I thought one of the things that I found helpful in writing a proposal was to read other successful proposals that my colleagues had written. That really was a big help, so I'd recommend that. But my question really speaks to the comments that you made before the last question about the changes in editorships at different presses. And, my particular situation may be particular to me and my bad luck in having the editor who acquired my book retire. And as you described, the new editor not really being sold on the project and dragging their feet. But I guess the question that I'm trying to formulate here is in developing contracts or in coming writing a contract with the press, should there be specifics about the understanding of your relationship to the editor? Because the person that signed me, the reason I signed with this particular press was because of the promise of real editing, of line editing. The new person is not sold on that. And so we've had this ongoing dispute. So this is a market academic press, so maybe it's, too specific and that doesn't really apply to this presentation, but in general, should a contract spell out what the relationship, what the editor's actually going to do, if it's going to be simply proofreading or if the editor is actually going to do some editing? I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And as far as examples, yes, I completely agree. It's helpful to see good examples. In the book proposal book, there are 2 sample proposals in there for people to look at. And in my courses, I also have lots of examples from alums of the course who have successfully placed their proposals. So those are good to look at. I think it's also important to understand the underlying principles, like why they worked, so that you're not just sort of mimicking. But okay, yeah, as far as the contract and the involvement of the editor. So the amount of support, like one-to-one support your editor is going to give you is never going to be written into the contract. It's just like, it's not something publishers do. They will not promise that. It is something that they, an editor could either take the personal initiative to do that with you if they really want to support you in the project. I will say that that's very rare in scholarly publishing because of the workload that editors have, and their role is really project management. It's not manuscript editing as much as they might wish it was. And that is why there's like a whole industry of freelance line editors, developmental editors, copy editors who authors work with to get that one-on-one support, because publishers really don't tend to provide it. They do sometimes provide it for books where they see a big market appeal, where they know that like, okay, we're going to get a return on our investment of time if we make sure this book is really well written. So if you're writing a trade book, you might be more likely to get that kind of support from an editor. But it would not be written into the contract. That would be more of a handshake agreement you would have with the editor before you decided to sign with that press. And then unfortunately, if that editor leaves, you're stuck. But I will say, not that people or you would necessarily want to do this, but if your editor leaves, you could try to break the contract yourself. You could say, well, this is not what I signed up for. Like, this is really not the experience that I, wanted to have with this press. I think my book would have a better home somewhere else at this point. And I think the publisher would probably let you go if you really wanted to. I don't have like firsthand experience with that I can recall, but they're not, I don't think they're super like litigious about these contracts. So if you did want to walk away because the editor wasn't there, you could do that. But yeah, it would be more of an informal, you just kind of hope your editor is going to follow through and do that upfront, or do that one-to-one work with you.
Thank you, Laura. That's these are tough decisions, I realize, for a lot of folks. I really appreciate you staying on a few extra minutes. I'm here
Sure.
seeing in the chat that a lot of people are saying how useful, incredibly useful this has been. The wonderful thing about this is you will have access to some of these resources and a recording, so you can go back to some of these things and kind of take them in again. And I'm just reminding those in the audience that the Drescher Center, remember, does provide funding for those of you that might want to do some of these developmental workshops if you've used your department funding. And also that the Drescher Center supports manuscript review workshops. So if you have a manuscript and you would like to get, faculty and scholars in your field to review that, we have funding for that you can provide funding to those. So if you're interested, please let us know, because it's a wonderful opportunity to get a review of your manuscript before it goes to the press, and maybe make some tweaks and some insights. And we're paying your colleagues to do that work because we realize how much work that is for them. Laura, thank you so much for being with us. You may well ask to be back.
That would be great. Thank you so much for having me, and everyone. I hope you'll follow up with my other resources, and we can connect again in the future. And it's always so nice to see institutions supporting their faculty writers, because it is rare and it's tough times. So it's not easy to do. So I really do appreciate it when I see it
We're
happening.
still recording as you say that. Yes, we are. Yes, we like to support our faculty in their writing endeavors, and it's important to us as an institution. So thank you for helping us do that. Have a wonderful spring break, everyone.